defense.
Do you see my hand? Do you see my whole hand? Or do you only see the side that I'm showing to you? For over almost 1.5 years, there's only been one side of this story that has been advanced by the government, by the media, but today, members of the jury, this week, you will now hear the other side of the story. There's been many interviews by alleged victims in this case, but there's one victim who has not said one word yet, and that is Mr. Theodore Edgecomb. And you will hear from him in this case. To the prosecutors, to my colleagues on the defense side, to the Cleereman family, who our condolences remain, and to the Edgecomb family. Good afternoon, members of the jury. I'm attorney Ivory Lamar, and I am joined by co-counsel in this case, if you wouldn't mind standing, Mr. Attorney Anik Ahmad, and the defendant in this case that we so are delighted to represent in this case, Mr. Theodore Edgecomb. It is our pleasure to represent Mr. Edgecomb in this case. It is an honor and a privilege to give what we call our opening statement. If you've had an occasion to go to a movie, you know you see what's called previews of the coming attractions or sneak previews of things that are to come. This is supposed to be a guide or a roadmap, if you will, as to what we believe the evidence will show in this case. As an officer of this court, in the course of my remarks this afternoon, I would expect to tell you as honestly and as forthrightly what we believe the evidence to show. As the court has so appropriately indicated, what I say is not evidence. It is just used to aid and guide you as to what we believe the evidence will show in this case. Now, we started this process yesterday through a process called voir dire. And during that process, you heard a lot of talk about justice. And just 2 days ago, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King. And I don't think anybody has said it is better than him as we talk about justice. And he said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we are now embarked upon this search for justice, this search for the truth, this search for the facts. Each of you made a number of promises during the voir dire process, and all sides of this case are extremely happy to have you a part of this jury. Abraham Lincoln said it best when he said, the highest act of citizenship is jury service. And you're embarked on that jury service today. And it doesn't just stop with you coming down today, taking a few notes, and listening to the evidence in this case. It only stops if you can and will reach a verdict in this case. A verdict that is based off the evidence and devoid of any type of likeness or bias or anything that you might have for the defendant. A verdict that is devoid of sympathy or passion against Mr. Edgecomb or any party that is a part of this case. Now, you made these promises, and we are mindful of those promises, and we expect that you're going to keep them. Now, we know that you're going to keep these promises and be fair and keep an open mind and decide this case, not on speculation, not on conjecture, not on surmise, but based upon the facts. You then, jurors, are the consciousness of this community. Your verdicts set the standards. You have this rare opportunity, as it seems, to be participants in this search for justice and for the truth. And during the course of this trial, you will likely reach one of the most important decisions of your life. And within that decision, people all across the world can say, this system works. This was a fair trial. These were fair people. So again, thank you for your time, your consideration, and the verdict that you're likely to render in this case. Now, the state came up here, and again, they gave you one side of the story. And at the onset, we want to make a couple things very clear right at the beginning. The defense in this case will be straight shooters with you. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, Mr. Edgecomb is not perfect. He makes mistakes like any other person. And there's three things that we want to talk about right at the beginning of this trial. Number one, Mr. Edgecomb, at the time of September 22nd, 2020, was in possession of a firearm that he was temporarily restricted of based off of a bail order that he had in other cases. We want to go ahead and get that out at the beginning. That's a fact. You will not hear any dispute about that issue. Number two, Mr. Edgecomb, on September 22nd, did in fact punch Mr. Jason Cleereman. And that punch was as a result, and you'll learn in the evidence, was a result of racial slurs that came from Jason Cleereman. Number three, you will hear evidence, and it will not be a dispute in this case, that Mr. Edgecomb did not turn himself in, and he was not apprehended until almost 6 months later. Let's just get that out the way. Now, the state in this case will try to convince you that that was because of consciousness of guilt based off his actions on September 22nd. The evidence in this case is going to show otherwise. Now, the state has talked about several parties to this case. And we got Mr. Edgecomb's dirty laundry out the way now. Now that's done. But the other participants in this incident that occurred on September 22nd, let's talk about them. What the state has done is they've shown Jason Cleereman in the best light. They've showed Miss Evangelina Cleereman in the best light. They've also shown the Milwaukee Police Department in their actions in investigating this case in the best light. Well, members of the jury, here's the other side. Welcome to the dark side. Welcome to the side where a woman who is married to her husband for over 25 years, where she sees her husband laying on the ground, never tries to save his life, never tries to apply pressure to stop any bleeding. The evidence is going to show in this case she never administered CPR. She never took one physical act whatsoever to try to save the man she claims and purports to love. The evidence is going to show in this case that the same woman, the same wife, never even called 911 to try to save her husband's life. That's what the evidence is going to show. The state just came up and they talked about video evidence as it relates to this case. Video evidence is very important in this case. As you are aware, there are 3 incidents that took place on September 22nd. You're going to learn of the first incident. The first incident where, in our view of the facts, obviously differ, but you're going to learn in evidence that the Cleeremans were out drinking heavily, as they often do. You're going to learn that Jason Cleereman, at least, had a blood alcohol level of a 0.12, which is almost 1.5 times the legal limit. You're going to learn that he also had THC in his system. If you're not familiar with THC, oftentimes associated with marijuana, weed. You're also going to learn that the Cleeremans get into a vehicle. After drinking, they don't call an Uber. You're going to learn in the evidence, they don't call a Lyft. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're going to learn they didn't even call a taxi, if you will. But they decided to get into a vehicle and operate that vehicle, and long and behold, they come into Mr. Edgecomb. Where was Mr. Edgecomb coming from that night? Well, the evidence is going to show that the last thing on Mr. Edgecomb's mind was first-degree intentional homicide. The evidence is going to show that Mr. Edgecomb was engaged in trying to prepare what he will refer to as daddy-daughter date night. You're going to hear evidence in this case that Mr. Edgecomb has 5 children. He has a special relationship with each one of his children. And he has one night that he designates for each one so that they can further their relationship, so they can get closer. On this night of September 22nd of 2020, his daughter wanted to have sushi, so Mr. Edgecomb gets on his bicycle. He goes to a place called Dynamite. He places the order for sushi for himself and his daughter. He actually placed that order. He paid for that order. Now this is during, obviously, the beginning of the COVID, and a lot of restaurants and businesses at the time would not allow patrons to come inside the restaurant, so you had to wait outside of the restaurant. They told Mr. Edgecomb it would likely be 30 to 40 minutes before his food would be ready. So Mr. Edgecomb says, well, trying to use time efficiently, I'm going to now go try to pick up dessert. I'm going to go to a place called Folio, go grab some yogurt so that they can have dessert to go along with the sushi for daddy-daughter date night. Well, his plans changed when he ran and came across the Cleeremans. The evidence is going to show in this case that as he's riding his bicycle along, he was not coming in direct, going the opposite direction of the Cleeremans. He was riding his bike along. The Cleeremans, just leaving from drinking at a bar, operate the vehicle. They're going down the street, and there's a vehicle that's parked. There's a vehicle that's parked, ladies and gentlemen, that has their right turn signal on, waiting for a parking spot. Well, the Cleeremans grew impatient. So what did they do? They come over, and they go into the opposite lane of traffic, coming into direct contact with another vehicle. Then they swerve over, and that's when they struck Mr. Edgecomb. Mr. Edgecomb lands on top of another vehicle. And that's not the end of it. Pardon my language, members of the jury. They did not say, however, quote, as the state has argued, what the fuck? That's not what they said. The evidence is going to show in this case that the Cleeremans, well, specifically Jason Cleereman, yelled out, "Get the fuck out the road, nigger." And it's at that point that Mr. Edgecomb got very upset. It's a very offensive word. Now, Mr. Edgecomb will testify and explain that as a bicyclist, this is not the first time that he's almost been struck by a vehicle. That is not what bothered him. Mr. Edgecomb is going to explain it's the use of that racial slur which set him over the top. So he's not just going to get food and just find a car and just go punch somebody. He goes to the car, he asks Mr. Cleereman, "Were you talking to me?" Mr. Cleereman says, "Yes, racial slur, I was talking to you." And that's when Mr. Edgecomb punches Mr. Cleereman. Now, we make no justification for that. No doubt about it, Mr. Edgecomb should not have taken matters into his own hands. He should have called authorities for them to handle the situation. There's no qualms about that issue. We don't deny he should have handled that matter differently. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Edgecomb is charged with first-degree intentional homicide. You're going to learn in this case that Mr. Edgecomb, after he makes the punch, he gets back on his bicycle immediately. He gets back on the bicycle, he's done with it. The way he handled it with the punch was not the best way. We see punches in basketball games, we see them in baseball games, and we most definitely see them in hockey games. Doesn't justify it, but Mr. Edgecomb gets back on his bike. He's done with it. Back on the daddy-daughter date night. Time to go get the yogurt, come back to Dynamite, get the sushi, continue on with his night. Nope. The evidence is going to show the Cleeremans had different plans. The evidence is going to show that the Cleeremans also did not call 911. The Cleeremans could have went straight after this incident. They could have, got a description. We've clearly seen Mr. Edgecomb being here today. The technology existed through video to capture him, but instead they went straight. They didn't go straight. They didn't make a left turn. They didn't make a U-turn. Instead, they didn't just follow Mr. Edgecomb. The evidence in this case is going to show they chased Mr. Edgecomb. The evidence is going to show in this case, Mr. Cleereman says to his wife, follow him. And Ms. Cleereman, no objection. She does exactly what her husband says, and she follows Mr. Edgecomb. She comes down the street. The evidence is going to show she's in the middle lane, and she's making a legal right turn in the middle lane. The evidence is going to show in this case that she turns the vehicle, the motor roars on that vehicle, and she's now turning that vehicle not into the two lanes that are completely available to her. She turns going directly in the direction of Mr. Edgecomb. And she accelerates aggressively and violently directly toward Mr. Edgecomb. That's not following. Members of the jury, the evidence is going to show they were chasing Mr. Edgecomb. The evidence is going to show in this case that before the vehicle even stops, Mr. Cleereman is almost already trying to get out the car already. The evidence is going to show he didn't just get out to go for a nice jog. As Ms. Cleereman has told many media outlets, the evidence is going to also show he wasn't getting out to go talk to Mr. Edgecomb either. The evidence is going to show that Mr. Cleereman was violently pursuing Mr. Edgecomb. Now, we talked about video in this case. We now know, members of the jury, you can expect to hear evidence that there were 3 incidents in this case. However, only 2 of those incidents were caught on video. Well, let me correct that. Only 2 videos were provided from the government in this case. There's video evidence. You're going to learn that there's a video at Casablanca, which would have captured the first incident. We believe, members of the jury, the evidence is going to show that that incident would have occurred at 7:45 p.m. Does the government give us video showing us 7:45 p.m.? No. You're going to learn, does the government give us evidence showing the videos at 7:30 p.m. from Casablanca? No. The video that the government provided in this case begins at 7:47 p.m., 2 minutes after which time we believe the incident would have occurred. No explanation. It's just missing. Members of the jury, the second incident, obviously where Mr. Edgecomb now punches Mr. Cleereman, you might guess the government has the full video of that incident. You'll see it in evidence. You'll see the full video. Let's talk about the third incident. As Mr. Huebner just came up and he talked about the poll cams that would have caught both incidents. They have 2 different cameras going 2 different directions. Well, You're gonna learn, members of the jury, that the incident, when the detectives arrived, when the medical emergency individuals came, that they were on scene approximately almost 5 hours. I mean, this is a homicide. There's unfortunately a deceased man that's laying on the ground. You're gonna learn, members of the jury, that out of 5 hours of potential video, you're gonna learn the government doesn't give us the 5 hours of video. You're gonna learn, members of the jury, that the government doesn't even give us 4 hours of video. Not 3 hours, not 2 hours. Members of the jury, not even 1 hour of that video showing the investigation in this case. You're gonna learn, members of the jury, that the government only provided 1 minute and 34 seconds. 1 minute and 34 seconds of video. We're missing the other 5 hours. That's what the evidence is gonna show. Now, you might ask, what is the significance of the rest of the video? Well, members of the jury, as we talked about, we've only talked about one side of the story. Well, let's start talking about the other side. The evidence is gonna show in this case that immediately after Mr. Edgecomb leaves the scene, within 6 seconds, see, the media has been showing one part of the video of that 1 minute and 34 seconds. The part that has not been released is the other half. And the evidence is going to show in the other half, Ms. Cleereman, 6 seconds after Mr. Edgecomb runs off, she gets out the car. She runs over to the body. She's not running over to the body, as the evidence is going to show, to save his life. She reaches down and she tampers with something. The evidence is going to show, it's going to be on video. See, this is the other side of the story. This is the other side of the hand. She runs back to the vehicle and she closes the door like nothing happened. Members of the jury, you're going to have to figure out why. Members of the jury, immediately after that, you're going to see a vehicle come into frame. You're going to see a red SUV. This red SUV comes into frame and it pulls alongside Ms. Cleereman at the time. This is right about the 1 minute and 34 second mark of the video. And all of a sudden, the video cuts off immediately as this red SUV gets aligned with Ms. Cleereman. And it cuts off. Why it cuts off, I don't know. The evidence is going to show that that video did not cut off coincidentally. They only cut the video up at 1 minute and 34 seconds for a reason. You're gonna learn what that reason is. Who is driving that red SUV? Well, the lady in the red SUV, her name is Stephanie Trotter. She's gonna be a very important witness in this case. You're gonna learn that there's 3 people that called 911 on September 22nd. You're gonna learn that one of those individuals was Stephanie Trotter. You're gonna learn that when Stephanie Trotter, she observes Ms. Cleereman on the phone, not with 911, you're gonna learn that Ms. Cleereman is on the phone with Anna. So instead of calling 911, the evidence is gonna show Ms. Cleereman called Anna, whose boyfriend or husband is a police officer. Now, you're gonna learn that Ms. Trotter got in contact with the defense in this case. She called the state, she called the police officer, she called 911, she talked to a detective on that evening, and the detective said, well, if you have any other information that you want to tell us, let us know. Well, Ms. Trotter is going to come on the stand and she's gonna explain that what she saw that evening was Ms. Cleereman getting out the car, running over to the body, which would be a second time, not to save Mr. Cleereman's life, not to administer CPR, not to apply pressure to a wound, but she's rummaging through Mr. Cleereman's pockets. The evidence is going to show Ms. Trotter is going to come on this stand and she's going to explain to you, members of the jury, that Ms. Cleereman was running through Jason Cleereman's pockets immediately after this incident. Members of the jury, Stephanie Trotter contacted the Milwaukee Police Department Homicide Unit on the evening of September 22nd of 2020. And she informed the Milwaukee Police Department what took place and what she observed. In the Milwaukee Police Department, you know what they said? Thanks for the information, have a good night. Thanks for the information, have a good night. Now, you're gonna learn, as in voir dire, you heard the state talk about witnesses that they expect to call on this case. Well, you're gonna learn that there's 3 people that called 911. You're gonna learn that 2 of those people that called 911 is on the state's list, but 1 of them is not. And that one that's not, you're not gonna see the state call Stephanie Trotter in this case. And you, members of the jury, have to figure out why. Members of the jury, it doesn't stop there. 43 minutes after Mr. Cleereman is laying on this ground, the detectives are on scene now. The police department is on scene, medical is on scene, the Milwaukee Fire Department is on scene at this time. You're gonna learn that there was, a witness, that one of the officers said, you know what, I seen him standing there. I believe he has information related to this case. I need to go over there and talk to him. Sounds reasonable, part of the investigation. You're gonna learn in this case, members of the jury, that there was one officer that said, and excuse my language, as I quote, "Fuck that, we got enough. We got the wife, we got one person that called 911, we got enough." And then you're gonna learn, members of the jury, the body cam cuts off. Members of the jury, this case is about this. Members of the jury, that was 24 seconds. I know it might seem a little bit awkward. That was 24 seconds. The evidence is gonna show in this case a video of Mr. Edgecomb trying to evade the violent, aggression of the Cleeremans for 24 seconds. That's just on the video. That's what the video is gonna show. That's what this case is about. That's what the case is about. The decision that Mr. Edgecomb made at a particular day, at a particular time, at a particular moment. You're gonna learn Mr. Edgecomb describe Mr. Cleereman getting out that vehicle. You're gonna learn Ms. Cleereman yelling out the window as well. You're gonna learn him getting out, not just going for a jog, as the state alleges. He wasn't just going for it. You're gonna hear in evidence that Mr. Jason Cleereman was chasing Mr. Edgecomb, yelling out more racial slurs. "I'm getting ready to kill you, nigger. I'm getting ready to kill you. I'm getting ready to kill you now." That's what the evidence is gonna show in this case. The evidence is gonna show from Mr. Edgecomb's standpoint that Mr. Cleereman has something in his hand at the time he gets into a boxer stance. Mr. Edgecomb is going to describe what he was feeling. He's going to describe what he saw in his perception at that very moment. The evidence is going to show that it just wasn't a boxer stance that Jason Cleereman got on, but it was a lunge. A lunge that took Mr. Cleereman almost 4 feet when Mr. Edgecomb backs up to avoid being tackled by Mr. Cleereman. The evidence is going to show, you're going to hear from the medical examiner in this case. And you're going to learn that Mr. Edgecomb the gunshot did not go off in this case 5 feet away. This will be 5 feet, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You're going to learn Mr. Edgecomb there was no shot that went off at a 5-foot distance. The evidence is going to show from the medical examiner that at most, the gunshot in this case went off at 2 feet. 2 feet. This was the maximum distance. The autopsy report says that it was from 2 feet as the max to several inches. Members of the jury, this is 6 inches. That's what the evidence is going to show. The gunshot goes off at the minimum of several inches. Mr. Edgecomb, when he testifies, he's going to explain to you that the last thing he was thinking about when a gunshot goes off, when he's trying to avoid being tackled by a man that's over 60 pounds heavier than him, was what he's going to do a month from now, or what he's going to do 3 months or 4 months from this very moment, or, as the state talks about the 6 months, this was the last thing he was thinking about what he's going to do 6 months at this point. That's what the evidence is going to show. He was thinking about how he's going to get home to his family at this time. That's what the evidence is going to show. You will not hear evidence in this case that during the time frame of 6 months that Mr. Edgecomb was not apprehended, that he was somewhere on the beach drinking mimosas. You're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear that he was having some grand vacation or having a grand time over the course of these 6 months. What you're going to hear is that Mr. Edgecomb was actively seeking legal representation. You're going to hear that Mr. Edgecomb was contacting lawyers all across this state to try to find representation, because one of the reasons that he ran, as he's going to tell you, is that he was scared. He was scared not only of the police department, who, might I add, labeled him immediately as the Brady Street Killer. Mr. Edgecomb is going to tell you that he contacted lawyers, he contacted organizations, and that he was on a quest to try to raise money so that he could afford legal representation in this case. You're going to have it. You can get the evidence in this case. That's what the evidence is going to show. Members of the jury, I want to thank you at this time for maintaining an open mind. I want to thank you for your attention. I know that this jury pool will take great notes, and that justice could be rendered in this case equally, impartially, and without bias. Thank you.
Can I ask Dr. Lawyers at a sidebar real quick before we get the first witness?